We have yet another new coach in the NFL. Welcome into the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show for January 25th, 2024. It is 7 p.m. Tonight here on Thursday, and that means it's fantasy football night in America. I am Eric Balkman, and welcome into the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. You follow me on the X, or maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I'm at Eric Balkman there. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour host, as well as the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown on the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Welcoming in my guest co-host for this evening, welcoming back on the show, the guest co-host for the evening. You follow him on the X at J Larky Tweets. He's from the 33rd Team FB. Josh Larky, welcome back to the show, man.
Eric, thanks for having me. I think it was like probably roughly a year ago at this point. It feels good to be back. I'm ready for my 2-hour segment. It's time to do my time. We've got a great show sheet. I've got some notes ready. I'm ready for this.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Coming up on tonight's show, basically, here's how we're breaking it down for you on the HSFF show. We're going to go around the NFL. Like I said, we got some semi-breaking news out of Atlanta. We'll get into that in a little bit. We're going to find out where Josh stands on certain players that are already being drafted in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament over at the FFPC. Players like Bijan Robinson, players like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Anthony Richardson, and much more. Then, in the second hour, Josh is going to help us out with all of your conference championship player props, the ones that he likes, the ones he's staying away from. I don't know how much we'll get into that, but definitely we'll get into some conference championship player props. Remember, this is that is his baby. This is what he knows how to do, and he's been very successful at it. And to wrap things up, we're going to go through and we're going to pick apart the very first draft that's already been completed for 2024 for the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. We're going to go through that. We're going to look at players like the Dolphins running backs, the Rams skill position players, the Packers, the skill position players for the Packers, as well as all the tight ends that went in the fifth round. We'll find out how Josh feels about it and much more. Want to remind everybody, you can go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. You can play in the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments right now. These two tournaments are going to run until the NFL draft starts. They'll conclude on April 25th. They're going to follow Best Ball Slim rules. There's no kickers and no defenses. 20-round draft, 14-week regular season, single elimination playoffs from weeks 15 through 17. Drafts are available every single day. 2-hour clocks, 6-hour clocks, 30-second clocks, and 60-second clocks. So you can take your shot at a $25,000 grand prize in the standard, the classic Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament at a $125 entry fee, or you can plunk down $35 in the Superflex version of the Never Too Early Tournament, and you could win $10,000. That's all at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Shout out to our producer tonight, the man behind the glass. It is Tyler Soto. And speaking of Tyler Soto, a pretty big Falcons fan, we had breaking news come out tonight, Josh, that the Falcons apparently are zeroing in on Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris as their next head coach. Pelissero from the NFL Network had this. Adam Schefter said from ESPN said that they're already planning to hire him. Now, this guy does have some head coaching experience with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But having Aaron Donald certainly helped him out in Los Angeles, and he did a good job in 2023 with a defensive unit that didn't have Jalen Ramsey, was missing a lot of playmakers, but did have Aaron Donald. He did a pretty good job. He coached for 3 years as a head coach and was a Falcons assistant for 5 years, 11 games as interim head coach in 2020. This means the Falcons have moved off of Bill Belichick. They've hired Raheem Morris. Now, Josh, I don't want to get too excited about this for my Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London shares yet, because I'll let you weigh in on this. If you're playing Dynasty and you have those three players, yeah, Arthur Smith is gone, but we kind of got to figure out what they're doing at offensive coordinator first.
Yeah, I would agree there. I think the biggest positive for Morris would be that this past season, outside of Aaron Donald, this was looking like it should be the worst defense in the NFL. I think it was like half the players were rookies, and then like half of them were undrafted. It was really Donald, one or two solid veterans, and then like pretty much 8 guys that were massive question marks. So I'd say what the defense did was a big win overall, at least for this past season, the most recent on his resume. What I do not like, why are you hiring a defensive head coach? When the key to the Falcons' success long-term is probably going to be through this young offense where they've invested 3 straight top 8 picks in offensive skill players, and they don't have a quarterback. I am very curious what they will do at OC as well. But I actually think this is, if I had to say neutral and negative positive, I'd say this is currently looking like a net negative. That the Falcons decided we really want a defensive-minded head coach, since also statistically they generally don't seem to work out as much as offensive coordinators getting promoted to that position.
3 straight top 8 picks for the offensive playmaker side of things. Robinson, London, Pitts. Josh, this year, the Falcons, number 8 in the draft. What will they do here? I think this is interesting because if you hire an offensive coordinator, a good offensive-minded coordinator, and by the way, Adam Schefter also tweeting this out, Rams quarterbacks/passing game coordinator Zach Robinson is going to be a prime candidate to be the OC in Atlanta. Morris says he wants to speak, or Morris, according to Schefter, is going to want to speak to multiple coaches, but Robinson's a strong candidate. Man, if they go, and think about this too, and I know we're getting into the minutia here, but they could trade up for a quarterback. They could grab another receiver there. Tyler and I were just talking about this before the show started. Roma Dunze should be there. Dunze, London, Pitts, Robinson. You get a guy who's not Arthur Smith. This could be a massive wheels-up opportunity if you're drafting in the never-too-early tournament right now, because you could cash in on some pretty good value on these Falcons offensive players if things go the way we hope they go.
Yeah, I think there's still just questions about what they're going to do at quarterback. I think the Rams offense looks great, but at the same time, it worked with they were Sean McVay there, and it worked with Goff until it didn't, and then they had to pivot to Matthew Stafford, who's a future Hall of Famer. We still currently are looking at Desmond Ridder. Does not seem like Desmond Ridder will be their quarterback, but then I simply ask who. I guess they can make roll out the bank trucks for Kirk Cousins type offer, but there's really not all that much right now that would get me excited. I guess if they're like, hey, Stafford, somehow you're going there, then suddenly I'm excited. But right now there's a lot of quarterback questions. There's still just a lot of talent there, where at least in fantasy, we really haven't seen more than one of them be successful at any one time in fantasy. So I'm very much tempering expectations still until we for sure know the OC. And then I think even more importantly than that, we know who the quarterback is.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And there's a lot of stuff they could do with that 8 pick. They could package it, like you said. They could break open the bank to pay a guy like Cousins. Fields is a possibility if they want to trade up in the draft. They grab like Drake May. I don't think they can get to number 1, but Drake May, somebody like that. Or who's the other besides Caleb Williams? Guys, who am I forgetting here? The other big main quarterback.
Drake May.
Drake May, and then Jaden Daniels. That was
Jaden
the other
Daniels.
guy.
Yeah, the big 3.
He should be up there as well. The other thing, let's bring this up. So there's quarterback questions that are going off in Atlanta right now. We don't have that same quarterback question in Cincinnati. Adam Schefter, and I'm going to get to the Chargers in a second. I want to skip over to the Bengals here real quick. Actually, you know what? I take that back. Let's do the Chargers here. Schefter reported that Jim Harbaugh is leaving Michigan, and he's going to take the Chargers head coaching job on a 5-year deal. Josh, to me, this is good news if you have Chargers skill position players in dynasty leagues or keeper leagues. This is great if you have Justin Herbert. And we'll see what they do with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Austin Eckler, quite frankly, as well. But as far as the coaching and as far as how good the offense should be, Jim Harbaugh has made it a career of taking a program and elevating it to the next level. The Chargers, to me, seem like a team that is very, very close, that they can get it done. Harbaugh could be what puts him over. And at this point, the fact that he takes over in Los Angeles, good news for Herbert. We love it. Good news, I guess, for Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer. I guess it kind of depends upon what the Chargers do with Williams and Allen and Eckler. Like, there's still a lot of moving pieces here. But whoever ends up on the Chargers at the start of the season, I'm actually liking pretty much. How are you looking at the Chargers skill position players and drafts now, knowing Jim Harbaugh is going to be their head coach?
Well, at the very least, I think some of the guys that look very locked in there, like Keenan Allen, that's very good. Like Justin Herbert, this is very good. I grew up in San Diego. I am a Chargers fan. I think this is the right type of hire to make. I suffered through Anthony Lynn and Brandon Staley, these coaches where the track record, a little bit questionable, but it's like, oh, this guy could be something. That clearly hasn't worked. What we have seen is that the Chargers roster heading into the past basically 3 seasons looks like a Super Bowl contender, and then the team during the regular season looks nothing like that. Harbaugh has been a talent maximizer. when he first burst on the scene in 2011 to be the head coach of the Niners. He was coach of the year immediately. The Niners were 6-10 the year before he showed up. Then they were 13-3 with a very, very similar roster. In fact, if you look at the offense, it was still Alex Smith, Vernon Davis, Michael Crabtree, Frank Gore. All the pieces of 2010 were pretty much there in 2011, and the team was just awesome. So I think that right there is really good. We just saw him win the national title with Michigan. Michigan opened that game as 5.5-point favorites. They beat Washington 34-13. Just time and time again, small spots, big spots, NFL, college. This is a guy that maximizes talent. This is a guy that wins. And I know some people just want to hear purely about fantasy points, but I think like the ecosystem of a winning team generally means you're scoring more than your opponents, and fantasy points come as a result. And that's often what I'll look at with these is, did the guy have a history of success? And then if we can look at like the OC types, I'm like, all right, what type of play calling might we expect? I don't really want to speculate on exactly what Harbaugh is going to do right now, but I just think in general, this is very, very good for a guy who's gotten the most out of his players, and where it feels like Chargers head coaches the last 3-4 seasons got the least out of those players.
The Chargers pick 5th in the draft, Josh. Gerald Everett's a free agent. Is Brock Bowers, is that too early for the Chargers to take Bowers at 5 and put him in that offense?
I think if they plan to use him like a traditional tight end, yes.
Okay.
I think if they plan to use him like how Kyle Pitts has been used, then yes, too early. If you were going to use him creatively, actually creatively, mostly have him as a slot type weapon who they occasionally line up outside to create mismatches against smaller corners, then yes, I'm all in favor of it, because at the end of the day, he is one of the most talented pass catchers in the draft. But yeah, I think there's other places I would probably rather go than that. But I wouldn't hate it if they actually used him like we kind of hope these players are used for fantasy.
Let me do this. Scale of 1 to 10. How confident are the following players? How confident are you that they're going to be back with the Chargers? I'm going to stick to just the offensive players. It seems to me Keenan Allen, you're pretty high on coming back to the Chargers. Scale of 1 to 10. 1, there's no chance he's back. 10, he's back for sure. Where are you at that?
I think 8, 9.
8 or 9.
I think he's back. Yeah.
Okay. What about Mike Williams?
Oh God. I think that depends on the ACL recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say
it's probably like a 4 or 5 right now, right?
I was gonna say 6, but yeah, maybe 4 or 5. Yeah, I think he's somewhere roughly in the middle, because I could see it going either way, and it really just will depend 4 or 5 months from now on his recovery.
And the thing is, they have Johnston, they have Palmer. It's not like the cupboard's bare there behind Williams. If they decide to move on, they have the other players there. Interesting one. A guy who was like a slam dunk first round pick in FFPC drafts last year, and I think he was the number 2 running back off the board in most drafts last year. And that's Austin Eckler. Obviously didn't have the season that a lot of people were expecting. And I know he's not the youngest guy in the world anymore. Your thoughts on whether the Chargers would move on from him or if he's back? Scale of 1 to 10 again.
Yeah, he'd be a 2 or 3. This is a team that has some cap issues. They have been refusing to pay the running back in Austin Eckler. His contract was so team friendly, and he wanted a little bit more, and they refused over and over again to budge. I think a new running back is in town for next season.
Okay. And now here's the thing. Spiller is there. They got the other cat. Kelly is still there. If you're drafting in the never too early tournament with the FFPC right now, you're probably not moving those guys up because, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. To me, it sounds like you think the Chargers running back to own is not on the roster yet.
Yeah, I would say like 7 out of 10 confidence. Okay. Then like the Chargers running back that is going to score the most fantasy points is not on this roster. I think they hit one in the draft, and I think they also potentially grab one in free agency as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh God, the Chargers, going to be fascinating to watch and draft this offseason. And then when we get to closer to the start of the season too, it's going to be pretty compelling. Let's talk Cincinnati. Ian Rappaport has reported that the Bengals have promoted their quarterbacks coach, Dan Pitcher, to offensive coordinator. This is probably pretty good news, I would think, for everybody who has Bengals in dynasty leagues. And then if you're drafting in the never too early tournament, guys like Jahmyr Chase, Joe Burrow, you're feeling pretty good about this. Now, Pitcher has been with the team for, I think, 8 years, 7 years, and he's been the quarterbacks coach since 2020. It sounds like the same offense will be there. Brian Callahan's offense, we'll talk about him in a second, is still going to be there. And he worked very closely with Joe Burrow as the quarterback's coach, obviously. Think about what he did with Jake Browning at the end of the season. So I think that this is, we're keeping that Cincinnati Bengals train on the tracks. We're moving it down, and we like what we're seeing here. So Chase, to me, is still a high first-round pick. You can look at Joe Burrow as a borderline top 5 quarterback. But then the question comes in, how do you handle T. Higgins? Because to me, I don't think he's going to be back in Cincinnati. But at the same time, if he does move on, it's probably going to be for big money for a team that wants to use him big time this coming year. Your thoughts on T. Higgins and sort of the Bengals offense as it stands right now with Pitcher as the new OC?
Yeah, I think the big thing here is we'll know more about what he wants based on what happens with T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. They're both free agents. I don't really see why Boyd would come back necessarily unless it's a super cheap deal. I just don't see the Bengals giving him much. Higgins, I really have no idea what's going on there. He's going to get a ton of money. I don't think the Bengals will be able to pay it, but then you've had comments from people like Joe Burrow that make it seem like they think there's a chance Higgins is back. So I really don't know what to think overall about who else is surrounding Chase. My gut feel would be that Ja'Marr Chase has less target competition in 2024 than in 2023. And then in terms of pitcher, like you said with Jake, I think that Jake Browning is the biggest positive there. Obviously, it's great. Oh, we like that he worked with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is also awesome in a vacuum. It'd be hard to truly screw up Joe Burrow. He was one of the highest floor quarterback prospects out there when he came into the league. I like that with Jake Browning, the offense immediately changed in a pretty major way. It showed that he was adaptive, and they did a lot of quick passes. He was not having to read the defense. Where Burrow, he takes a lot of time in the pocket. He's reading the defense. It was almost like going from one quarterback to kind of the opposite type quarterback of what you need to do. Mm-hmm. And Browning was much more successful than I think any of us really thought he would be. So I'd say this is either neutral or positive overall.
Mixon, are they moving on from him?
I would think so. They said the only reason he stayed with the team this year, or this year is in 2023, was because he took a fat pay cut. So, you don't really like to hear that. Chase Brown looked better than him at many times towards the end of last year. Yeah. I'd be pretty surprised if Mixon is, to begin with, a bell cow for the team. Even on top of that, just with the team in general. And if he's with the team, I think he's in a committee.
What would you do? Just curious, would you be drafting Chase Brown and Travion Williams like Chase Brown's the starter and Travion Williams is the backup if you're drafting now? Or do you think, again, similar to what you think about the Chargers,
I think there's another
running? Yeah, there's going to be another guy coming in.
Yeah, Chase Brown's pretty raw. Okay. I know people in fantasy are like, oh, pass protection doesn't matter. It doesn't score fantasy points. What does score fantasy points is being on the field. It's pretty clear he's a liability there. Kind of was in college as well. I mean, he could improve, but I think if the Bengals really thought this is going to be our clear-cut guy for next year, he would have at least had a couple games towards the end of the year, especially once Burrow went down and the season's already kind of over. And people are like, oh, it's not over. They can make the playoffs. Like, you're not going anywhere in the playoffs with Jake Browning. Let's think realistically. If they really had any interest in trying to groom that guy to be the lead back, you'd think he would have at least had an audition. Like, I thought I'll give an example. Like the Vikings having Alexander Mattison as their lead back this year, I thought was terrible. Awful idea. He's a terrible player. I told everyone not to draft him. He stinks. Anyway, that's less about me patting myself on the back. On a serious note, he at least had a lot of games where he showed that in small samples, he could be the guy with a lot of touches. We never even have had that with Chase Brown. He's had 1 year. I would be very surprised if a fifth or sixth round rookie from last year who never even had more than like 7, 8, 9 touches in a game suddenly becomes the bell cow next year.
Let's frame this question this way. The Cincinnati Bengals number 2 wide receiver is fill in the blank. And I'll give you some multiple choices here. Andre Yosevich, Trenton Irwin, somebody else, like not on the roster, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. Which one of those 5 is most likely?
I'd say it's either Higgins or not on the roster. I don't think Irwin or we'll call him Yoshi since I don't know how to say his name. Andre Yoshi.
I'm good with Yoshi.
He goes by Yoshi. So I don't think Yoshi or Irwin is the future wide receiver 2 here. I think there's some wish casting probably by the dynasty community that had these guys as sleepers.
Like me.
Probably, it's not going to be Boyd either. Like we've seen enough of Tyler Boyd. The Bengals are trying to win.
Totally agree.
So yeah, I think it's either Higgins or someone in the draft or just a free agent.
That Yoshi was a guy that in my dynasty leagues, like the final week, I'm like just trying to grab anybody, that I think, and I grabbed Yoshi in probably like 3 or 4 dynasty leagues. So he's the first guy I'll cut, but I just want, we'll see what happens with him. I think you're right, by the way. Even when I picked him up, I'm like, Cincinnati's not going to go to battle with this guy's their number 2, but you never know.
I mean,
take a chance.
If you're going to dart throw, you might as well do it on a team that has an awesome quarterback. So I think that's the process that I take as well. Yeah. Usually when you see like Puka Nacua, for example, I mean, Puka's good. We'll talk about him more in the show, but I think anyone that's trying to think of him in a vacuum and not acknowledging that Matthew Stafford quarterbacked the 2 greatest fantasy receiver seasons ever with Calvin Johnson and Cooper Kupp, and then the greatest rookie season ever with Puka Nacua. It's hard to disentangle quarterback from receiver oftentimes, so you might as well, if you're dart throwing, you lean towards the good quarterback.
Brian Callahan, the former OC in Cincinnati, is apparently finalizing a deal with the Tennessee Titans to become their new head coach. The Bengals scored 21.5 points per game last year, Josh, while they were fighting through a lot of injuries. He's from the Callahan, from the Gary Kubiak coaching tree. He's worked with Peyton Manning. He's worked with Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow. The Titans, I think, kind of have to figure out what they're doing at quarterback, if it is Will Levis or if it is somebody else. And I don't want to say the cupboard's bare in Tennessee because, you do have Hopkins, you do have Burks. There's something to be said for Chigakonkwo here. But the Callahan hire in Tennessee, moving on from Vrabel, from a strictly fantasy perspective, I like this. Now, I don't know who's going to be on the roster. I mean, I don't even know if Derrick Henry is going to be on the roster. We can talk about Tyjae Spears. But I think this is arrow pointing up for Tennessee skill position players for fantasy with Brian Callahan as the new head coach.
I think I'm a little bit more neutral than you are positive. I'll kind of explain why. So Bengals, I always thought they were a little more run heavy than they probably should have been. I can't deny the success they had through the air. They were unbelievably efficient, but these were always pretty bad running teams that just kind of kept running the ball a lot more frequently than they probably should have. So I guess like maybe the Titans were like, we love being run heavy or more run heavy than people expect. That could be a thing. Also, Joe Burrow was always sacked quite a bit, led to a lot of injuries. Even when he returned from his ACL tear, he was sacked a lot. It just never really ended. Even this past season, he sacked a lot. His career sack rate, I think, is over 7%. Quarterbacks generally own their sack rate for the most part, but that's nearly twice what Mahomes is. I think there's just ways where he could have helped create offensive game plans where Burrow doesn't need to hold the ball as long, more quick passes. And then I think the tough part of Callahan, I think it's great. The Bengals were a very, very good offense. I think in many ways he was maximizing talent. But I think it is difficult. Sometimes you have to disentangle Callahan with Burrow, with Chase, with Higgins. Now he gets Will Levis and not much else. And that always concerns me. Not that it's bad, but I think that we always have to think about how do we disentangle this offensive coordinator from what he was given. And he was given quite a bit. So that's why I'm more neutral for those reasons. I think the obvious positives are he came from the Bengals and they had top offenses.
Right. And okay. So, and you make some good points there. Do you think that here's the other thing I wonder, Will Levis fell to the second round of the draft. I feel like this could be in a weird way, a make or break year for Levis, where they will just like, okay, here's what we're going to do. It's Will Levis in 2024. We'll figure it out after that, but this is his opportunity. And then I wonder if he doesn't work out, and I don't know how you could talk about how you feel about Will Levis from a NFL standpoint, but if it doesn't work out, this could be a long year, and the Hopkins, the Burks, the Okonkwo's, even if you get deals on them, they might not pay off in fantasy this year, Josh.
Yeah, I'd agree there. I think 2024 we're either terrible with Levis and then take a quarterback the year after, or, oh, wow, Levis actually surprised us. Right. Kind of like with Jordan Love and the Packers, where you're like, oh, you know what? Yeah. Look, this isn't a rebuild. We have our quarterback of the future. He's right here. So I think Levis probably won't be the Jordan Love path. He will probably be like the Kenny Pickett path, where 2 years in, you're like, yeah, he's probably never starting for an NFL team again.
Right.
But I think there's at least some potential. Levis' supporting cast was terrible. He had probably the NFL's worst offensive line. DeAndre Hopkins is still quite good. That's about it. Burks was barely healthy.
Yep.
Okonkwo's an athletic raw tight end. It's fine. Derrick Henry was showing his age, but still decent. But overall, when you're a rookie quarterback behind the NFL's worst offensive line and you don't even start till midseason, the deck is stacked against you. So I do want to give him more time and not read too much into like just his raw per game stats from 2023. But I'm 100% with you. It's going to be the Will Levis show in 2024. This team's probably going to stink. There is no reason for them to try to be good this next year. I think you stink, you see what you have with Levis, and you go from there and kind of rebuild most likely.
Yeah, and new head coach allows you. He gets that opportunity to rebuild if that's the way that Tennessee wants to go with Rand Carthon now calling the shots there. Let's talk about the Chicago Bears switch conferences here. Shane Waldron, the guy who was with Seattle for the last several years, is going to be the offensive coordinator for the Bears. He has been with the Rams 2017 through 2020, and then was the OC for the Seahawks. Now, when the Seahawks hired him in 2021, he hadn't called plays at all. His offense never ranked lower than 17th in any of his 3 seasons, and it got up to 9th 2 years ago. If you look at what Waldron was, more of a run-heavy coach when he got the job in Seattle. But then what Seattle did, Waldron coached Geno Smith to a resurgent year. Metcalf, Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba all had flashes, pretty good seasons under Waldron. Now he goes to the Bears. And what's interesting about this is the Bears have the number 1 pick. And they have the opportunity to either say, okay, Justin Fields is our guy, or we're going to reset the clock. We're going to go with Caleb Williams, and we'll try to give him some skill position players in the draft, and they can grow up together with Shane Waldron calling the shots. I like this better than, I like Waldron there better than Luke Getsy, Josh. This is an improvement. But this comes down to what the Bears do at quarterback. For anybody drafting in the Never Too Early Best Ball tournament, you kind of have to take a stand on Fields. And you kind of have to take a stand on the Bears. What does your gut tell you what the Bears are going to do with this number 1 pick, and how do we exploit that for fantasy?
I think they're going to go Caleb Williams. I don't know how you could have watched this year and thought Justin Fields is our Super Bowl winning quarterback. Yet, I've seen some Caleb Williams tape. People that are actual tape grinders and not an analytics guy like I am have also seen a lot of tape, and there's many people out there that are pretty confident Caleb Williams is a very, very, very high-end, potentially generational quarterback prospect. 0 people right now are saying that Justin Fields looks like a generational NFL talent after 3 NFL seasons. Mm-hmm. I think that's all you need to know about what they should be doing, and I think ultimately what they will do. I don't see how all of them get in the room, look at Justin Fields, especially that final game against Jordan Love and the Packers. How can you look at that game when you know that you're going to be facing Jordan Love in your division and go, yeah, Justin Fields can hang with this guy? Right. I don't see that happening. Shane Waldron, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. He had a very, very underwhelming, terrible year in 2021 with Russell Wilson. 2022, he was awesome with Geno Smith. Awesome. Gold star. And then 2023, I think all said and done, was a little bit underwhelming. There were some O-line injuries. Geno Smith wasn't as good. But I think overall, I just wasn't super impressed. I was kind of neutral. So I think we have a really bad season, a really good season, and then a season that's pretty neutral, maybe a little bit disappointing. The play calling wasn't super progressive. 2 of those 3 years, the offense finished with 20th or lower in total yards on offense. That's not very good. So I don't really have too much of a stance other than I'm just not that excited. I'm not saying it's a bad hire, but I think it's fine. We'll kind of see what they do at quarterback. But I was very excited when he took over in 2021 with his background with the Rams, how they maximized Jared Goff to his fullest potential given his physical tools, sort of like what the Lions have done these past 2 years with Goff once again. Just Seattle was very much a mixed bag.
Well, let me ask you this, and we'll have a little fun with this too. You just said you think they're taking Caleb Williams. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. But if they do, what happens to Fields? Give me a scale 1 to 10, how confident you are Justin Fields plays for blank in 2024.
I've already given this hot take a couple times. We're going to do it again because it's been a few months. With 20% confidence, Justin Fields will be the quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons. The better in every way version of Desmond Ridder. I don't think they're quite in the right draft spot to take a true franchise quarterback. And I think this is perfect. Either Justin Fields with a better offensive line and elite skill players continues to progress and be more than adequate for the next 2 seasons before he gets too expensive, or he's terrible once again, and you get a higher pick, and then hopefully you actually find the quarterback the year after. So that is the bold prediction that I think makes at least a little bit of sense all across the board.
If Fields did go to Atlanta, and I've talked about this with plenty of people, are you worried about, because I'm always nervous about drafting pass catching running backs on teams that have a quarterback that is really talented with their legs. How badly would Fields affect Robinson's fantasy output if that were the case?
Well, that's a good question. I think he'd be a round 2 pick. I think he's a locked in round 1 fantasy pick right now. I think he goes kind of like where Jonathan Taylor was going at times last year before we knew about the multi-game suspension, when it was just like, oh, Jonathan Taylor with Anthony Richardson. Richardson's mobile. He might steal some goal line work. I don't know how we feel about this. And then he was kind of like the 16th to 18th pick in drafts. Then the suspension hits. He falls a lot. But once Richardson was there, Taylor kind of fell slightly out of the first round. Why not see the same thing with Bijan? I think that's probably the best parallel I can think of.
We have talked so much about 2024 drafts, ladies and gentlemen, but when we come back, here's what we're going to do. I want to unpack a couple of the players from the divisional playoff weekend this past week, specifically some Bills and one Buccaneer, and then we're going to find out where Josh Larky stands on certain players like Jahmyr Gibbs, like Evan Engram, like Trey McBride for 2024 drafts next year. He's Josh Larky from the 33rd team. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, and it rolls on right after this on the Better Sports Network.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coop A Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And since he covers fantasy football, I said, hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year? And he goes, yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL. And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there. NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one, the holy grail of NHL games. NHL 94 for the Sega Genesis right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta that didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
And then you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on exclusively right now on the Better Sports Network. 22 minutes until the top of the hour. I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, of course, the FFPC, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, being joined by Josh Larky tonight. Josh from the 33rd team. Boy, my God, your resume in the fantasy sports industry, it is very, very long. how did you get started? And, with regard to whatever stops you want to talk about, just let the viewers in onto how you got to where you are right now, Josh.
I'm on mute. Whoops, there we go. So
There you go.
apparently,
You're
one of the things that you can do if you want to be full time is forget about the mute button. On a serious note, I was in grad school studying analytics, and I went to the Sloan MIT Sports Analytics Conference. That does not mean I went to MIT. I did not go to MIT. I went there for a conference, and I was sitting in the back at a football analytics panel, and I just randomly happened to sit next to Matt Kelly, the founder, CEO of Player Profiler.
Podfather,
struck up a conversation. The Podfather, yes, a real life good friend. Even though I don't work there anymore, some people thought we had beef when I left. There is zero beef. One of the best guys I know in the industry, and exactly where I got my start was through Matt. He was the one that struck up the conversation. I was the one that helped keep the conversation going, and I think that it just kind of shows the importance of networking and always being prepared for conversations like that. Matt grilled me on a lot of stuff, trying to figure out what my coding background was. I think a lot of people just think I showed up and had a job in the industry, which would have been really nice, but I didn't. I was getting $10 an hour in grad school to do coding for him. Then I worked in professional baseball, doing Moneyball type stuff. I was doing that for a couple of years, working for him on the weekends. Not great pay. Not like a diss on Matt at all. More just, you have to earn your stripes. I'm just getting a little bit of hourly wage, doing a lot of behind the scenes research. Nobody knows who I am. I don't know who anybody is. I am just doing a lot of coding for him. And when COVID hit, I was COVID furloughed from baseball. And that's when I hit up Matt and started to ask him for more work. And the reason he was willing to give me more work, which I ended up doing very well on, so then he kept giving me more work. But the reason he was initially willing to give me more work is because I was always consistent. I always did good work. And I had proven myself for 2 years at that point, more than about 2.5 years actually, behind the scenes for him. So I think that's really important, is that for people that want a job in the industry, it's probably not going to happen overnight. If it did, that's awesome. It didn't for me. I'm kind of glad it didn't, since I think a lot of why I do fairly well at my job now is because I understand how to work hard and the importance of it. But yeah, I think the actionable takeaways are networking is important. Always be prepared to run into somebody like that. That way, if Matt starts or whoever it is starts talking to you, or if you run into me one day and want to drop at the 33rd team, that you sound like you know what you're talking about, that you have your elevator pitch prepared, that you can talk about creative ideas you have to make different types of companies better. I think all that's very important. And then the last thing is just consistency. A lot of people always say that. They're like, oh, you just have to work hard. Really what it is for this type of work where it's remote, there's nobody watching me. The guy that I report to at the 33rd team lives in Los Angeles. I live in Denver. He never looks over my shoulder. He physically cannot look over my shoulder. I just have to get the work done. I have a team of 20 that I manage. They're all remote as well. I have to try to hire people where I don't think I have to look over their shoulder at all times. And I think that's really important, is how do you get work done when nobody's watching you? And some of the big things for me there are, obviously, I consider myself a reasonably hard worker, but I also really like what I do. And I've always tried to make sure that the work I'm doing in this space is stuff that I enjoy. I have turned down many projects before at places I've been in this industry simply because I didn't want to do it. And I didn't think I'd be good at it. And I don't mean like everything that you do has to be what you love. And that if someone's like, hey, do you want to do this? And you're like, oh, I'd rather write this column this week, not this one, that you just flat out deny it. But more so that long-term, the projects that you're doing behind the scenes, the types of research you're doing, that you're always trying to set yourself up for success. And I think that's really important, because people work really hard naturally when they like what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I've generally had a pretty good understanding of what I really enjoy. And one thing that I started to realize over time I didn't enjoy was coding. So I got my start. I have a master's in analytics, and I started to realize I didn't enjoy that. My current role at the 33rd team, I code 5 to 10 hours a week. I'm much more content, company strategy, people management. And that is really what I enjoy right now. And I think what I'm good at and what I'm willing to put a lot of really, really hard work into. So hopefully people listening can take at least something away from what I just threw out there.
I'll be honest with you. Like, I was a double major in college, and I really went to school for journalism. And I learned, like, at the end of my journalism classes, I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this for a living. And so I added a radio, TV, film degree and or major, I should say. And journalism is something I did for a little bit. And I'm like, this is not for me. Like I know I got a degree in it. I am out. Like this horrible advice for anybody out there where you major in something and then you try to do it. And you don't like it. Wasn't great. Dominic Guzzetti, very accomplished FFPC player, watching us live on YouTube tonight. He said he has heavy interest into getting into the industry. Josh, would you recommend him volunteering? Is that a good idea? Because I know everybody wants to be paid for their time because it's the only thing that we can't get more of, right? But sometimes volunteering can work out. So what would you tell Dom?
You said Dominic. Yeah, Dominic, this is a great question. I get this a lot, and I actually really don't like when people DM me on Twitter. I get a lot of these. Hey, please let me work for you. I want to work for free. Does nothing for me. I really can't be hiring people for free. Some companies can. That's great. Most of the more reputable companies will pay. Shocking. They will pay. I actually don't really mind the free part. The thing that I take the most issue with generally is it's like, okay, cool. Work for free. What are you going to do? I don't know. Do you want me to just assign you something? What I really like, the best DMs that I get for everyone out there that wants to, even if it's a different industry, if you just want to work for a company, have something that you know the company can improve on or should do and propose that suggestion and how you're going to do it. I think that's really, really important. So if someone were to come to me and they said, Josh, I've seen your content and you're missing X. Let me sell you on why you need X and why I can do it. Now I'm very, very interested. And I'm if I really like it, I will try to help that person get paid for their work. But the people that are like, I will blindly volunteer my time, take me under your wing. I don't even know what that means. I don't have a lot of time in the week. What do you want me to, you want free mentorship? I'm kind of like, I don't even know what you want. But if you were to say like, here, let me pitch you on this series, or let me pitch you on this research, or check out this thing I wrote. Here's why I think it helps you in this way. Now suddenly I'm really interested. So I think it's always important to think about the person that might be hiring you and why it makes sense for them. Because I'm going to work for free doesn't always make sense, because I'm kind of like, okay, like what are you going to do? Like, what if I was like, hey, we really need graphic design work. You can do that for free. And they're like, well, I don't do graphic design. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know what to do here then. It really doesn't make sense unless you're providing the actionable, here's what I'm good at, here's why I think you need it, and let's go from there. So I think that's much more important to me than just saying like, I'll work for free, which like, cool. Like, it's not like I'm like, no, like I hate free labor, or like, oh, like,
right.
Show you, like, I hate people that are committed to this industry. It's just everyone's kind of a moving chess piece, and how can I utilize your talents? How can you help us in return? Vice versa.
It's all about tangible and actionable, right? Because if your DMs are flooded with people saying, hey, just tell me whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for free, as opposed to somebody saying, hey, I see a hole in your coverage here, or I see something that I'm wondering about that I don't get at the 33rd team. I'd love to put this together. Here's what I'm thinking. That is much more unique. Be different. And I think like the fact that somebody can do that, it's already going to stand out because it doesn't blend in with all the others. Just whatever you want. Like, let me know. I'll do whatever.
I got a quick example of a cold DM that went really well. He works for the 33rd team. Max Ford. I think the story can be intimidating. I don't mean it in an intimidating way. I think it's just more showing how someone can separate themselves immediately. The opening of his DM was, I have a master's in business analytics and used to play defensive end in the Canadian Football League. Immediately, I'm like, huh, I don't think I've met someone like that. And not that everyone out there has a master's in business analytics and played defensive end for the CFL, but the idea that immediately there is a clear value add with that skill set. And I know exactly what it is. You want to know what he does for us, folks? He does some O-line and D-line rankings. Shocker. The guy that played defensive end, who understands numbers, is doing some rankings with offensive, defensive lines. It was so easy to figure out some kind of fit for him because I immediately knew his skill set and where he stood out. And rather than asking for a job immediately, he was very clear that he was letting me know, here's just so you can get the wheels turning, like here's some stuff I'm good at, and we can go from there. And no, I think it's intimidating in the sense that I don't know anybody else that's done that. I certainly haven't done that. I have a master's in business analytics. I played football in high school. So like not in the CFL, not defensive end. I'm not a large man like that. But the general idea that like the value add was so easy. So like if someone's like, hey, I've done, I don't know. I formerly did some graphic design freelance work for Bleacher Report, and I've won 3 high stakes fantasy championships. Already I can start to picture, maybe a little bit of fantasy content, maybe a little bit of graphic design. And it's like, already I can start to see like, do I need that stuff? So I think that's what can help people.
The DMs are open at J Larky tweets. Is that your preferred method, or would you prefer people contact you a different way?
Well, yeah, they can DM me. I won't promise to respond to all of them, but I will at least glance and take some kind of mental stock of each one.
Perfect. Let's take some mental stock of Dalton Kincaid. We have not talked about the divisional playoff. Dalton Kincaid this past weekend, 5 catches on 5 targets for 45 yards in the loss to the Chiefs. The rookie tight end can't play narrative seems to be dead or dying at this point after what we saw this past year from both Laporta and Kincaid. Specifically about Kincaid, Josh. He is going in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament on average as tight end 5 at the 505. Again, tight end premium, so that's why he's going a little bit higher. But he's going above Kittle. He's going above Engram, Njoku, Brock Bowers. Is this something that you would support, taking Dalton Kincaid in the mid-5th? Or is that even too low when you think about tight ends and that position in 2024?
That sounds about right to me. We'll talk about it more later, sort of like where we view a lot of different players in fantasy. And a lot of them I'll actually give my ranking. I just dropped an article at the33team.com, free to read, where here's my top 36. So it's the first 3 rounds, how I think it should be going. And I don't have Kincaid in there. I was doing it for PPR, not tight end premium.
Right.
But anyway, one thing is I was trying to figure out where to rank Josh Allen, because I was like, what's going to happen with his supporting cast? I thought Stefon Diggs might not be there. He doesn't deserve to be there after complaining all year about this and that, and I need more targets. It turns out the dude turns 30, turns into a pumpkin. And unfortunately, I looked at his contract and he's stuck there. So Josh Allen will have Stefon Diggs. Dalton Kincaid will have Stefon Diggs. I think that's bad for Josh Allen potentially, because I don't think he's the high-end wide receiver 1 for real life that he used to be, or for fantasy. Diggs, spoiler, was out of my top 36. Dalton Kincaid, though, I think that's pretty good. I wouldn't be absolutely shocked if his target numbers per game are similar enough to Diggs next year, after we saw Kincaid keep ascending, Diggs keep descending. So guy that has some path to being probably the 1B in a Josh Allen passing attack, that's very exciting to me. We've seen guys like Gabe Davis get steamed to the 4th round 2 years ago. Dalton Kincaid, if he's going in the 5th round in tight end premium, that sounds pretty reasonable to me, to be completely honest. I wouldn't say like, smash at that price or terrible price. That sounds fair.
But if you like him, take him there. You're not overdrafting him. I get it. I totally
I wouldn't say so.
Let's talk about Diggs for a second, and we're going to get to Taco Chan's question here in a second. But I do want to talk about Diggs. So 3 catches, 21 yards on 8 targets in that loss to the Chiefs. Diggs did finish, and I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at you here, and some support the argument, some go against the argument. Diggs caught 107 balls last year, just under 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. However, more than half those yards came in the first 6 games of the season. He did not post a 100-yard game since week 6, and he didn't get in the end zone since week 12. The second half of the season was completely different. Whether it's age, whether it's frustration, whether it's something else, whether it's a combination, I don't know. You did not have Stefon Diggs in the top 36 of your early overall rankings. Currently, in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, Josh, he is going as wide receiver 11 at the 208. To you, that is too rich of a price to pay, and you'd be more likely to take, Olave or Collins or Ayuk. 3 wide receivers are going in front of him. That's too rich for you for Diggs. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's way too rich. If we look at week 7 onward, which is an 11-game regular season sample, because as we talked about, he killed it the first 6 weeks. The next 11 games, his 17-game pace was 90 catches. That's pretty good, but only 870 yards. He couldn't really win very far from the line of scrimmage. Guy that's pacing for 870 yards, that's 51 yards a game. That's terrible. And you're telling me that he recently turned 30? and I'm supposed to think it's going to get a lot better for him. I color me skeptical. I don't think there's a lot of meat on the bone with that ADP for him to do better than it. I think there's a lot of reason to believe he would do worse than it. I think he should be somewhere in the 4th round. I don't think he's a top 3 round pick personally. I think there's too much name value inflating that ADP.
This goes into the question from Taco Chan here on YouTube. Is there a wide receiver that's already on the Bills that is going to make a big step up next year? Now, we already know you're not a fan of Diggs that high. We know that you think that Dalton Kincaid is a solid pick in the mid-5th round. What we haven't talked about is Dawson Knox, Khalil Shakir, Gabe Davis is a free agent. And then there's some other guys there on the Bills. If you're drafting this early, is there anybody you like? Maybe as a mid-round pick or a late-round stab, Josh?
Yeah, I do a late-round stab on Khalil Shakir. I liked how he came on strong towards the end of the year. The draft capital is pretty terrible. Day 3 pick. I remember in my prospect research, he was someone I was pretty high on. I thought he might sneak into round 3 of the NFL draft. If he did, I would have been very, very in on him. Would have liked that draft capital. Day 3, so I considered him a dart throw at that point. Good separator. Pretty good in space. Mega producer in college. Decently fast. And then he plays with Josh Allen. So we should like all of that. The touchdown catch that he had against the Chiefs. Great route. Even better throw by Allen. Just great catch by Shakir. Those are the type of things that stick with coaching staffs for the offseason, is they're going to remember that and remember that Khalil Shakir came on strong the final month. I think he's probably not all that much. Probably as in more than 50% chance. However, I think there's at least some possibility that it's Diggs, Kincaid, Shakir as the 3 top targets next year. And if so, then Shakir would look like a steal as a late round pick.
I do want to point this out. Dom Gazzetti said Shakir had less than 50% of the targets that Diggs got, but he actually had more yards, 30 targets versus 80, which is great. And I know Diggs' yards per catch, yards per target went way down the second half of the year. And if you look at it in the FFPC Never Too Early tournament right now, Shakir is wide receiver 55. So he's going outside the top 50 wide receivers, but he is going in the mid-12th round. So if you want to grab him, you can't wait till round 20. You got to grab him in the 12th round, which to me at that point, I get it. If you're looking for a number 5 receiver, I think you could do a lot worse, and you'll take your chances with Shakir at that point. Another team that lost, like the Bills this past weekend, Josh, was the Buccaneers. Now in this game, Rachaad White, 9 carries, 55 yards. He also had 4 catches for 36 yards, and he got into the end zone. Rachaad White, if you look at, and you already know this, but I'm going to tell the viewers anyway. If you look at Rachaad White this season, a little bit deeper than just surface, just simply box scores, 3.6 yards per carry. Derrick Henry had more rushing attempts, and only 5 running backs had more targets than White this past season. There was nobody else in Tampa, yet he didn't, blow the roof off the joint, essentially. To me, the Buccaneers had the lowest rushing success rate in the NFL. To me, this looks like a situation where on the surface, if you're drafting, you're like, oh, Tampa doesn't have anybody else. Give me Rachaad White, totally undervalued in 2023. I'd be willing to pay up for him this coming year because I know what he's capable of. He's going at the 311 in the Never Too Early FFPC tournament as running back 10. We've been talking about this with the Chargers running backs, the Bengals running backs. I'm going to throw the Buccaneers running backs in here. I think they do something else at that position, and it will crater White's value to the point where if you're drafting now and you're taking him at the end of the late third or the end of the 3rd round, you're going to regret that later. Your thoughts on White?
I think I'd actually go the other way. I have him as a 3rd round pick in my way too early rankings. The reasoning for it is that he was a 3rd round pick 2 years ago, so he's entering year 3. There's still some tread left on the tires for that rookie deal. He was terrible as a rusher. I'm not going to deny it. He was awesome as a pass catcher. The one note about the rushing, who on the Buccaneers when they got opportunities was better? Because as far as I could tell, he was always the best running back on that team. And I think we have to remember that the yards per carry is kind of relative to his situation. This run game in Tampa has been broken for several years now. I don't really know if it's Rachaad White. I don't know if it's not Rachaad White. The draft capital, I think, is just good enough. And I think this team has so many other holes, and they'll look and maybe they do have some early down thumper come in that at least splits some work with Rachaad White on the early downs, and then he's the pass down back. But I actually think there's some real chance that he just sticks as the workhorse or maybe even bell cow like he was this past season, simply because I don't really know who else they would grab, or internally who they could look to and say, look at how this guy performed better in 2023 alongside Rachaad White. Like we had like Chase Edmonds, was it Keyshawn Vaughn, I think actually had some touches at one point. And then I feel like there might have even been one other guy, but yeah, he was just so much better than anyone.
You had Edmonds, Vaughn. You had Edmonds, Vaughn, and there was another. This is going to irritate me now. I'm going to look it up right now. But there was another guy there that that caught me off guard in drafting season. Even Sean Tucker from Syracuse.
Sean Tucker. There we go. I knew there was one guy I was forgetting. Yeah. So ultimately, Rachaad White looked better than all three of them. I'm not saying any of these three guys are particularly good, but I think at least in terms of yards per carry, these guys were all terrible. It's not like when you were watching any of these guys play, you thought, oh, yeah, this guy's clearly the guy that's going to take his job. So right now I'm leaning optimistic, open to being very wrong there. Well, he does have to escape not just the draft, but free agency. Right. There's still a lot of running backs out there. But I have a hard time believing that the Buccaneers will look at this season and say Rachaad White was the problem.
So for you, and this is like you're opening my mind to this now. For you, the next step for Tampa Bay is understanding that our ground game, specifically our running back, is not what we need to improve on. We need to improve on the offensive line. We need to get better players in the secondary or at linebacker. Like, because in the draft, Tampa will be able to attack this position if they want to, but it almost seems like you think there are better ways to spend the picks rather than get a compliment to Rachaad White when you already have Sean Tucker, when you already have Chase Edmonds, when you already have Keyshawn Vaughn, who may or may not be on the team next year.
Yes, and the one other thing is I might think differently a little bit depending on the draft class. This is a terrible running back draft class. Yeah. There's no headliner. Nobody at this point really looks like more than a round 3 running back, which Rachaad White already was. So, yeah, there's no like Bijans, there's no Najee Harris, there's no Travis Etienne's, there's no Jahmyr Gibbs. None of these guys that are being projected to go early in the NFL draft, none of them exist this year. Wouldn't surprise me if there's no running backs taken in the first 50, 60, 70 picks.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that for 100%. It's a heavy wide receiver draft. I like Bowers at the top for tight ends, and then obviously pretty good quarterback class as well for super flex drafting. We will explore that and much more going forward on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show Thursday nights right here on the Better Sports Network. We are coming up on hour number 2. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to lead things off with where Josh stands on certain players, and I'm going to lead things off with Jahmyr Gibbs. I want Josh, you to go back on draft night 2023 and how you felt about Jahmyr Gibbs. And I want you to explore how you feel about Jahmyr Gibbs now as far as fantasy goes. We're going to get into CJ Stroud. We'll get into Breece Hall as well. And then we'll get your picks, your player props for conference championship weekend, Lions and Niners, Ravens and Chiefs. It's the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Josh Larky from the 33rd team. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. Hour number 2 kicks off right after this.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But
yeah.
Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman, and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
4 minutes past the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, exclusively on the Better Sports Network. Thank you so much for watching and enjoying the show tonight. Josh Larky from the 33rd team at JLarky tweets on the Twitter, or on the X, excuse me. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, HSFF, and the RotoViz HSLD. I want to talk about, and I'll preface this, Josh, by saying in fantasy football, I have learned way more from my mistakes, my bad calls, and my failures than I have on being right on certain players, which is few and far between. But I've gotten a lot of players wrong over the years. Jahmyr Gibbs, can you tell us how you felt about the Lions taking him when they did on draft night? And can you tell us about how your thoughts about Gibbs, as far as just purely fantasy, how they've evolved over the course of the 2023 season? Where do you stand on Jahmyr Gibbs?
Wow, we're really struggling with the mute button after these commercial breaks. So I was super high on Jahmyr Gibbs before the draft. Every early best ball draft, I slammed him round 6, round 5. I was like, guys, he's probably going in the first round of the draft. We should love this player. He catches passes. He's super fast. Then on draft night, he goes to the Lions, who had DeAndre Swift and didn't seem to use him properly, who had just signed David Montgomery, a goal line vulture, and a pretty good running back in all phases, to a fat contract as well. And I said, this is not the landing spot I was hoping for. We love the offensive line. We love that it's a good offense. We hate that it's tough to see how he actually is involved when there's David Montgomery, Amon-Ra, St. Brown. I was like, we've already got pieces here. Like then they take Sam Laporta. People talk a lot about how tight ends and running backs often siphon targets from each other because they're both closer to the line of scrimmage. And I really didn't like it. And I think by the end of this year, what I realized is that Jahmyr Gibbs is so good that he helped them realize they shouldn't have given that huge contract to David Montgomery. I have Jahmyr Gibbs as my 8th overall player right now heading into 2024 fantasy drafts. Ultimately, what I liked is that he doesn't play much the first 4 games. Weeks 5 and 6, he's injured. Then the next 11 games, he goes on a tear. 13 carries a game, 4.8 targets a game. So that's basically 18 opportunities per game, 92 total yards a game. He scored once per game on average. I don't know if that continues, but I think with the good offense and his big playability, it's not out of the question. And that was also 18.5 PPR fantasy points a game. That's a pretty high-end fantasy RB1. The only players this year that over the full season had more than the fantasy points that he had over those 11 games, the 18.5 per game, would just be McCaffrey at 24 and Kyron at 21.5. So I think that shows you what the upside is. I'm pretty in on him at this point. He was taking some real red zone carries, some real goal line attempts away from Montgomery at times.
Yeah.
The playoffs, it's been mostly Montgomery. He has all 6 goal line carries, but that's also a 2-game sample. Gibbs has still been heavily involved. And I think it's clear at this point that Gibbs and Amon-Ra are the 2 featured weapons. And then Laporta is kind of that third guy, but because he plays tight end, he's awesome in fantasy. So that's sort of how I'm starting to see it.
Right now in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament ADP, shout out to Fantasy Mojo at Fantasy Mojo on the X, Darren Armani, who keeps track of all this. Which one are you more likely to draft this year? And if you want to say both, that's fine. Jahmyr Gibbs currently going as the fourth running back off the board at the 111 right now. David Montgomery, running back 22 at the 612. So you can get Gibbs at the end of the first, Montgomery at the end of the sixth. I don't know if you'd want to pair them together in a tournament like this. I certainly would not. I want to pick one or the other. And then as far as which one you're most likely to pick, given the draft capital, Josh, I know that 111 is lower than 8, which is where you have Gibbs. But your thoughts on Montgomery at the end of the 6th round as well?
Yeah, well, we'll go with I prefer Gibbs. I don't have full rankings out. I haven't done a 2024 draft yet. I'll start doing them in another week or two. But top of my head, I would have said that Montgomery should be closer to RB25 to RB30, just thinking through stuff. And how it's an older veteran running back who saw his workload start to decline as the season went along. I'm not quite sure why we should be so in on that. So that's just not the profile of player that I'm super excited about. The fact that he's going in round 6 is kind of where he went last year. So it's like you think this is the same profile of dude when we just saw that Gibbs is actually taking more of his lunch money than expected.
Right.
So, yeah, I think I would have, if someone said gut feel, where's Montgomery, I'd say he should be a 7th or 8th round pick. So 6 feels a little early for me.
What about, and I said this like several weeks ago, one of the more compelling players to follow in draft season, which is happening at the FFPC right now, is Breece Hall. Breece Hall was a guy, Josh, that had he not torn his ACL, he might have been the 101 or 102 pick in 2023 drafts. Tore his ACL. He obviously tumbled in drafts. He came back. He looked good last year. But and everybody remembers the championship sprint where he is catching double-digit passes every single week, which was fantastic. But that was with Trevor Siemian throwing the ball, a guy who's not really equipped to throw downfield, number one behind that offensive line, and number two because he's not Aaron Rodgers. You know who is Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, and he's going to be the quarterback next year. Not likely to check down a ton. I'd like to think that the Jets' offensive line gets a little bit better. So all these check down passes that we saw for Breece Hall at the end of the season, which might cause his ADP to spike, I don't know if they're going to be happening next year. They could be few and far between. Yet he is going off the board right now as running back 2 at the 107. It's McCaffrey at the 101, and then the next guy off the board, right ahead of Bijan Robinson. They're kind of neck and neck right now, but Hall is technically ahead of him. Your thoughts and how you feel about drafting Breece Hall as a mid-first round pick next year? Ostensibly, we'd like to think with Aaron Rodgers in at quarterback.
I have him at player 7 overall as well, funny enough. So I would say I agree with this. I put out a tweet yesterday. I don't tag players, but I tagged Breece Hall because I've seen that he's active on Twitter. He retweeted it. It was kind of cool. I was like, guys, do you want to know who led the NFL in 175-yard rushing games? Breece Hall. Do you want to know who led the NFL with 75 or more receiving yard games? Oh, that was also Breece Hall. This guy is just kind of ridiculous with his skill set, with his big playability. That was coming off of an ACL tear, playing with 3 different backup quarterbacks. I think ultimately if they ask him to run more, he can do it. If they ask him to catch passes more, he can do it. We saw Aaron Jones be absolutely awesome with Aaron Rodgers, where, yes, the target volume wasn't actually very high. I completely agree. I think the checkdowns go down by a lot. But the yards per reception, the big playability was awesome for Aaron Jones. Breece Hall is just a much better player. He's going to get higher volume. Aaron Jones one year was, I think, the RB2 overall, the touchdown spike season. Mm-hmm. That could be Breece Hall, which is more touches as well. So I think if there's a guy that challenges McCaffrey for RB1 overall, it would be Breece Hall this next year, just because of he can handle a lot of touches. The offense could be really, really good. And we know that he can get it done in all phases. And we know that even in the absolute worst situations with no offensive line, he can still have these massive games and these massive big plays.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is with Rodgers on the field more, it's going to keep the Jets offense on the field more, or it should at least. And that will give more opportunities to Breece Hall. So bear in mind that And what you're saying here, and I'm echoing it here, the targets may go down, but the targets might be higher value targets. I mean, Josh, I don't know if I told you this or not, but I live in the shadows of Lambeau Field here in Northeast Wisconsin. So I've seen for years what Aaron Rodgers was able to do with Aaron Jones in the passing game. And I see a lot, and I think Breece Hall is more talented than Aaron Jones. So it could be even bigger for him next year. And for him going at the 107, I could get on board with that. A player that's going right ahead of him in drafts. And he has ascended to the elite status of fantasy football. Another Lion, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We have in the FFPC never too early best ball tournament, Christian McCaffrey going off the board at 101, and then 5 straight receivers on average after that. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Ja'Marr Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think there is a lot of warm fuzziness about drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown, given how consistent he was this year. Is he ever going to be a 14 catch for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns guy? I don't know. I mean, that's few and far between. That's Jefferson, that's Lamb, that's Hill, maybe Chase, maybe not St. Brown. But what St. Brown gives you every single week, essentially 7 for 70 and then like a touchdown every other week. I think drafting St. Brown early like that and you get the safety in it, like, yeah, maybe you don't get the big spike weeks, but I think there's a lot of value and consistency here. Your thoughts, where do you stand on Amon-Ra St. Brown as the wide receiver 5 at the 107 this year?
So I have him as my player 6 overall. So I would say that I roughly agree with that. I think the big thing here is that I agree it's not the sexiest pick. He's probably never going to lead a week in fantasy points the way that someone like a Chase or a Tyreek Hill can do, or Justin Jefferson can do. But what he does is he compiles. And not only does he compile, but he actually showed this year that he can compile a little bit farther down the field. So 16 games played last year in 2023 and in 2022. So it's apples to apples. He went from 106 catches to 119 catches. He went from 1,161 yards, so basically a little under 1,200, to just over 1,500 yards. He went from 6 to 10 touchdowns, and his average depth of target went from 6 yards downfield to 7.5. That 1.5 yard increase is 25% based on what his original number was. That's all very, very good. And rather than 12% of his routes out wide, 17% of his routes were out wide. And not only did he have 1.9 yards per route run in 2022 when out wide, it went from 1.9 to 2.4. Essentially, he was winning downfield more. They put him outside more often. He also won there, but he still is primarily a slot guy where he always wins. I think he's kind of like the next tier where he's not quite Jefferson, Chase, Hill, Lamb. I think those 4 are sort of like just above him, where their role is just a little bit better, a little more downfield. And I think Amon-Ra is like really just knocking on the door, and he should be that kind of that next guy.
I did not own this next player that we're going to be talking about. Maybe one league. I mean, it was in like 20 some leagues. I think that I only owned him in one league, and didn't pay attention to his stats over the course of the season. So when I was preparing for shows after the season ended, Josh, I was doing my due diligence on tight ends, and I could not believe Evan Engram. This dude caught 114 balls this year, 963 yards, only got in the end zone 4 times, but he saw 143 targets, played in every single game for the Jaguars this year. And I was blown away. I could not believe this guy. I mean, this has got to be the quietest 114 catch season for a tight end in history. I look at where he's going in the never too early tournament right now, and he is smack dab in the middle of sort of like the second tier of tight ends. It starts with Kincaid in the mid-5th round. It ends with Brock Bowers at the end of the 5th round. But in that glut there, it's Kincaid, it's Kittle, it's Engram, and then it's Njoku, and then it's Bowers. Now, I could talk about any of these tight ends here at length, but I want to specifically focus on Evan Engram. I do believe he's a free agent. I also don't believe the Jaguars are going to let him get away. If they keep him on the team, this is a team that already had Christian Kirk. It's a team that already had Calvin Ridley. I understand that Ridley was adjusting to his new team, new OC, new quarterback, blah, blah, blah. But I look at Evan Engram. I can get a guy who caught 114 catches in 2023 as a tight end 7 at the end of the 5th round. Sign me up What am I missing here? I feel like Engram should be going much higher. Where do you stand on Evan Engram?
So a few things. I also did not have Engram anywhere. I did not have any managed league with Evan Engram as my tight end. Sometimes I regretted it. Sometimes I didn't because he just didn't score touchdowns this past year. He will be in Jacksonville next year. He signed a 3-year deal with them. If you look at the contract money, it's basically last year and this year. And then this year is in 2024. Then there's a potential out after 2024.
Oh.
But at the very least, he will be in Jacksonville this year. I think the funniest stat that you could say is that Evan Engram had 4 touchdowns on 114 catches. Jimmy Graham had 4 touchdowns on 6 catches this year. So that's pretty hilarious. But I think
it's a funny game. It's a funny game.
I think the issue with Engram is that among qualified tight ends, the only tight end whose average depth of target was lower than Evan Engram's 4.7 yards from the line of scrimmage was David Njoku. Njoku, at least you can make the excuse of the quarterback play was so atrocious before Joe Flacco showed up. And when you watched Browns games, they were just throwing him screen passes after screen pass. He wasn't even used like a tight end. They really just needed plays to be made, and their quarterback situation was so bad. Trevor Lawrence is pretty good. Evan Engram doesn't really have that excuse. So I think that's the big concern is what the heck were they doing? I mean, I guess it was effective. He had all these catches, but I generally, when a player's so pigeonholed into that role, it does make me a little nervous. So I think where he's going is probably fine. I wouldn't say that I think that's a bad spot. Again, like you said, 114 catches. If you told me, and it might be the NFL record for a tight end, I'd believe you. I don't know. That sounds like it's probably the record. 114, that's a lot. Eric is Googling it.
I'm Googling it right now. It's actually what I'm doing. Okay. That is, oh no, that's not all time. I gotta get it. I get career and I get game, but I don't get season. That's what I'm looking for right now.
Yeah. We'll assume it's either number 1 or number 2. So I think in that sense, it's great. He's got a great quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. I just get a little bit concerned when the guy is kind of being manufactured these targets almost and isn't really winning downfield. So I think that's my issue. PPR, tight end premium, like FFPC, I think that's great. Obviously, we don't really care at all where he's getting targets. We're just like, give me receptions when it's 1.5 points per. So I think where he's going sounds pretty good. Maybe like, yeah, if I had to choose a stance, I'd say like 6 out of 10, where 5 out of 10 is I get a player exactly at once in 12 drafts. 6 out of 10 is a little better than that. So I'd say 6 out of 10 if he goes round 5 in tight end premium drafts. But I'm not just like all gung-ho, because at the end of the day, it was 114 catches for not a lot of yards, not a lot of touchdowns, because he wasn't allowed to run downfield.
All right, let's do trivia time with Josh Larky here from the 33rd team. I'm going to give you the top 4 tight end seasons as far as catches go here. Coming in 4th, actually it's a tie for 3rd. 2022 Travis Kelce and 2012 Jason Witten both had 110. Evan Engram is 2nd on this list. His 2023 had 114. Now, here's the record holder. He did it in 2018 with 116 catches, and he's still alive in the NFL playoffs, although not.
I know who this is. It has to be Zach Ertz then, right?
It's Zach Ertz. Yes, it is Zach Ertz.
He was one of my like sneaky candidates because I knew he had 1 or 2 crazy years where, just like Evan Engram, also not really allowed to run downfield, very close to the line of scrimmage. I'm trying to remember. Is he on the Lions? Is that where he is? I know he's
Detroit.
on.
He's on Detroit,
okay, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's doing there, but he's having fun.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was Laporta insurance or what it was, but I mean, Laporta looks healthy enough right now. It's so crazy because the season that Ertz, okay, so not that I want to turn this into a Zach Ertz show, and I won't, but I'll make this quick. So rookie year, 36, second year, 58. But then his 3rd year, 75, these are all catches, by the way, 75, 78, 74, 116, 88, and then he fell to 36 in 2020. 2021, he had 74, got back up there with 74, and then 47 and 27. He's been dealing with some injuries since then. But yeah, Zach Ertz, God bless him. He's over 700 catches and 7,000 yards in his career, closing in on 50 touchdowns. Unbelievable stuff. Let's keep the tight end train rolling here. Trey McBride is a player that people were excited about at the end of the season, given what he did. His final game of the year, Josh, 3 catches for 34 yards. He does get in the end zone. That means he ended the 2023 season, his sophomore year in the NFL. 81 catches, 825 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was basically the top tight end on this team after Zach Ertz went down with injury in week 7. The Cardinals have the 4th overall pick. They're probably going to be rebuilding. He had 26.5% targets per route run. That was best among tight ends in 23, while just running 378 routes means that he could still retain value and he could still become this behemoth, as Stephen Wright from Reservoir Dogs would say, as far as the tight end position goes in 2024. That said, I talked about the second tier of tight ends, Josh. He's in the first tier. It's Sam Laporta at the 204. It's Travis Kelce at the 211. And then it's Trey McBride as the 3rd tight end off the board in the mid-3rd round. Does that strike you as too high, or do you believe that he maybe keeps this pace up or even gets a better pace going in 2024? I know the Cardinals have some moving pieces on offense, but man, what we saw with McBride second half of the season, we loved.
Yeah, I have him tight end 2 right now behind Laporta, ahead of Travis Kelce. He took over for Zach Ertz week 8 as the starter, averaged 8.5 catches or 8.5 targets, 6.5 catches, 66 yards, 15 PPR fantasy points per game. That's a 10-week stretch. The 15 PPR fantasy points per game would have led all tight ends if it happened for a full season in 2023. The guy's round 2 draft capital from 2 years ago. He was a Mackey Award winner for best tight end in college. He's very fast. The target competition, it's pretty minimal too. Maybe they get like a Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm really not quite sure. There's going to be another receiver there, but there's still just not much. Yeah, I think even if Marquise Brown is somehow back, I could see McBride out targeting him. I think what we saw, you can't put the cat in the bag. He was just so good for fantasy, for real life. They had already taken him in the 2nd round. It's not like some scrub tight end, or it's not like an Isaiah Likely situation, I guess, where they're like, oh, like, what was he, a 4th or 5th? I think 4th round pick. He ran a 4.8 40-yard dash. It's like it's just so different. So, of course, Mark Andrews with the fat extension is the guy that's going to just immediately usurp him whenever he's healthy again, which seems like this week. I think McBride, I don't know what they're going to do at tight end. I don't know what they're going to do at receiver. But one thing I do know is that at worst, like, what is McBride can be the number 2, if not the number 1. I think he's probably the number 1, at least in terms of pure targets for this season, unless they have Harrison Jr., in which case it's like co-number 1s probably. I'm very, very bullish on McBride.
Yeah, I am too. And I know it seems rich, but you're talking about a dude who was just sucking up targets like a Hoover vacuum here. That just doesn't go away. And who was just pointed out in the Harry Snowman pointed out, if Marvin Harrison Jr. goes to Arizona, McBride's going to be tough to cover because of how talented Harrison is and the coverage he's going to be demanding. And I think he lives up to it. So I think there's a lot to be said for Trey McBride as a top 3 tight end in FFPC drafts right now. Harry Snowman wants to know, I think I just said this, I could be wrong. Where's Trey McBride going? 308 on average in the FFPC never too early best ball tournament. Tight end 3 right now. You can register and play at myffpc.com there. One last thing I want to bring up before I want to get into your conference championship props here. Anthony Richardson, I think, is going to be a polarizing quarterback in drafts this year in 2024. Right now, he is going as quarterback 5. So he's going behind Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes. But then it's Richardson, and he's going ahead of Stroud, Burrow, Prescott, Purdy, Herbert, Fields, Murray. The list goes on. Your thoughts on taking Anthony Richardson as quarterback 5 at the 608 on average? So you can get him in the mid to late 6th round right now, Josh. Does that price seem right? Because we've seen the ceiling, like what he can do. Well, we haven't seen the ceiling, but we've seen the highs of what he can do. We've also seen the problems with the injuries that he's faced this year. Of course, the Colts could use him in a different way in 2024. I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, round 6 sounds pretty good. I think he's going to have to change the style of play a little bit. He had 3 different injuries in a month of playing time, and one of them was season ending. That's terrible. But I think the upside is there. We saw that not only can he be an elite runner, sort of like what we expected, but that he was ahead of schedule as a passer. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
This was an injury that was season ending, but it wasn't like a year-long rehab. It's just a few months. So he's going to have a nice off season to practice being a quarterback. The reps are going to be valuable. He was only a starter for a short time in college. So the fact that he was so good and polished as a passer, where he looked kind of like a league average passer, which I think Lamar Jackson is in many ways, like a league average passer. But then the reason that he's so awesome is his passing stats are incredible because teams have to defend him differently because he's a world-class runner. So I think with Richardson, it kind of makes sense why we should like him fantasy upside wise. I think anytime he's healthy, he's probably scoring like the third or fourth best quarterback at worst. So I think that's pretty good. Supporting cast could be better too. It's pretty much.
What are they going to do with Pittman? Pittman's going to be a Colt next year, right? They're not going to let him get away.
I don't think you can do that. I think that's like true malpractice. That's Carolina Panthers level malpractice to have a young quarterback that's still learning quarterback with no receivers. I think we just see this show time and time again that you can't do that. So why would you take away Michael Pittman from Anthony Richardson? Josh Downs is a really fun player, some sneaky flex upside at times. Maybe he's really good down the line. I don't think next year you want a small slot receiver like that to be your number one option. I don't know why Pittman would go. From what I'm aware of, they are not in particular cap trouble. So I would be absolutely floored, A, if Pittman left, and B, if Pittman left and they didn't grab like a Mike Evans, T. Higgins type to just immediately replace him.
Right. A lot of people who are watching this program tonight, Josh, are like, God bless it, Balky. Josh Larky is the head of fantasy and gambling for the 33rd team. We need to get some player props from him tonight. You have kept us for 90 minutes and we have gotten nothing. Well, I'm giving you the floor now, Josh. You have some opportunities here to talk about your player props for not only the Ravens and the Chiefs, but the Lions and the Niners. I give you the floor. What can you give the viewers tonight of who you like this weekend?
I'll do rapid fire. I've got 5 props to discuss. There's some more that we have in a best bets article. It's free to read. You can see all the props for myself and the rest of the team. It's on the 33team.com. Early in the week, I liked Mecole Hardman under 12.5 receiving yards. It's off the board. He was under that 11 of his 13 games. Under 10 yards even in 9 of 13. He had one game above 13 yards all season. So under 12.5, I was like, when has he gone above it? Twice. One time he had 13 yards. Cool. The other time was week 18 when the Chiefs rested their starters. The guy fumbled twice on 2 touches last week. I think just simple theory. Do you want to give that guy more or less of a workload than the week before? Probably less. That's completely off the board. I also liked Gus Edwards early in the week at 39.5 rush yards over. It's up to 43.5 yards. I think that's still playable. A little more risk, obviously, when the number's worse. But I still like that. I would still lean over. Best odds for that are FanDuel at -110. That same number, 43.5, is -120 on DraftKings. We always want the better price. You want FanDuel there. Edwards is probably going to get 10 to 14 carries. It's a run funnel Chiefs defense. We saw James Cook, Ty Johnson, and Josh Allen all have at least 40 rushing yards versus the Chiefs last week. Ravens are favored by 4 points. Game script's probably in their favor. The concern here is Justice Hill was surprisingly the lead back over Gus Edwards last week. I don't know if that sticks, but all I know is that Edwards still had 10 carries last week. I don't think they're going to phase him out. One that you can get at the exact same price that I hit it at a couple days ago is Mark Andrews over 35.5 yards, -110 on FanDuel. He played 9 full games this year. He had at least 35 yards in all 9. The one game that he was under, he had 2 catches for 23 yards on like the first drive. It was when he got hurt and he sprained his ankle. He was a full practice participant last week, and then they didn't have him play. And now, once again, he's a full practice participant this week. I think he's going to have pretty much a full, if not a truly full role based on him having 2 straight weeks of full practices. Isaiah Likely betting lines took a day and a half to come out after Andrews' lines came out. That makes me think Andrews gets most of the work. I believe Likely's receiving yards props around 20. That's about half of Andrews. It seems like everyone is thinking Andrews is just the guy once again. I think another positive is that Odell Beckham Jr. ran under 10 routes last week. He was targeted once. He caught it for 12 yards. It's probably just Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, and then maybe Rachaad Bateman, who's not a big target earner himself in the receiving game. That's great for Andrews. 2 more in the other game. One of these has moved a lot. Brock Purdy, I took his pass yards over at 257.5. I dropped that in our 33rd team Discord. I hit that on Sunday at the bar right after Chiefs Bills ended. I was like, I wonder what Purdy's pass yards prop will be. It's probably really high. Well, I hit it at 257. It's now in the mid 270s. I would still lean over because Detroit's allowed 345 or more passing yards in 5 straight games. They can't defend anybody through the pass. Their offense is good enough that their offense is good enough that then the opposing offense that's playing the Lions has to push the pace. And I don't really see the Niners shutting out the Lions, far from it. The Lions' offensive line is one of their strengths. They should be able to mitigate the really, really good pass rush of the 49ers and put up points themselves. So then on the other end, Purdy would have to put up points against this terrible Detroit secondary. The 5 quarterbacks that had at least 345 passing yards these past 5 weeks, Nick Mullins twice, Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield. That's a mixed bag of Dak and Stafford, awesome. Baker, fine. Nick Mullins, probably terrible. So Detroit also really good run defense. So I just like that Purdy one. I'd still lean over even in the 270s. And then people want to bet on touchdowns. They probably want a touchdown prop. Why not go with Jahmyr Gibbs scoring a touchdown at plus 145 on FanDuel? It's plus 115 on DraftKings. Huge odds discrepancy. That's top of my head. I believe that'd be like 4.5 to 5 percentage points of implied odds in your favor on FanDuel. He scored in 6 of his past 7, 10 of his past 13. The implied team total for the Lions is 22 points. That means people are expecting close to 3 touchdowns. He's had 3 red zone carries and a red zone target in the playoffs already. He hasn't taken goal line work from Montgomery in those 2 games, but late in the season, he did take some goal line work, so it's a small sample. Maybe he gets some goal line work in this game. But at the end of the day, I think the thing to be most excited about is it's always fun to watch exciting players score touchdowns. That is Jahmyr Gibbs. And I would not bet him at plus 115. I would take him at plus 145. Plus 115 seems fair. Plus 145 seems like we have a little bit of value on the bone percentage-wise. So there is 5 rapid-fire props. I'll read them one more time. If it ever pops back up on the board, just hit a Mecole Hardman receiving yards under. He stinks. Gus Edwards, the rush yards over. Mark Andrews, receiving yards over. Brock Purdy, pass yards over. And Jahmyr Gibbs to score a touchdown.
I love it. Question from the chat, Harry Snowman. He says he loves the Brandon Ayuk anytime touchdown. He thinks that Ayuk is going to give, I think it's Kindle Vildor, the corner from Detroit, when he's on the right side. And then if Samuel does play in this game, he loves it even more. Your thoughts on the Brandon, and he doesn't lay any odds here. I don't know what it's at, but Brandon Ayuk anytime touchdown.
So if you asked me who's more likely to score, Brandon Ayuk or Jahmyr Gibbs, I wouldn't really have an answer. Jahmyr Gibbs, you can get his anytime touchdown at plus 145. Ayuk is at minus 115 the last time I checked. That odds discrepancy, top of my head, is going to be close to 15%, 12%, 15%. That's a pretty big difference. So I actually don't think that's a terrible price or anything for Ayuk, but I really don't bet a lot of. Yeah, I like Gibbs better. I really don't bet a lot of anytime touchdowns. I know that people like it. I really only bet anytime touchdowns when I think the odds just don't make sense with either the guy's role or when the odds have a huge discrepancy across platforms. So if you were to tell me that, hey, you got Ayuk at minus 115 on DraftKings, but ESPN Bet has him at plus 120, then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm excited. All right, let's check out ESPN Bet for that. So I think my caution is betting receivers at minus odds for touchdowns historically has been really terrible. I think what's working in our favor is that, as I mentioned, the Lions can't really stop anyone. Here's the big problem, though, is that, they can't really stop anyone through the air, but there's Christian McCaffrey. There's always Christian McCaffrey. Brandon Ayuk did not have a lot of touchdowns this season. It's because of Christian McCaffrey. I don't know if Debo plays. Whether or not he plays, Christian McCaffrey will play. And I think that's going to be your biggest concern for an Ayuk touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs is the same thing. The obvious concern to David Montgomery. But Gibbs' odds are significantly different, at least right now on the touchdown market, than Brandon Ayuk.
I totally get what you're saying on that as well. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break, real quick break, like less than 2 minutes quick. When we come back, we have breaking news out of Carolina. I want to get your thoughts on that. I also want to get to Biplab Mandel's question about Likely versus Andrews going forward for season-long leagues. That and more. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, pulling into the home stretch here with Josh Larky from the 33rd team. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get you all set for the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament as we go over the picks of the first draft that was completed right after this.
From the Hometown Hero series, Zach Parise.
That is a very nice card, and that's one I'm probably going to have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. I mean, Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done.
There we go. The first card-for-card trade on Rip and Riff history. And it was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because, you know what? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like, we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and, like, take the other one over the barrel. So there you go. In a penny sleeve. Hometown hero, Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
Well, if you're a longtime viewer of the show, you know I always mistime these breaks, which is what I did once again here tonight. Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Eric Balkman from the FFPC, and of course, Josh Larky from the 33rd team, the head of fantasy and gambling there. Follow him on the X at JLarkyTweets. Hey, I want to tell you about the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription. You can unlock all content for all sports, including annual draft guides, one-on-one expert access in Discord, analyze matchups and trends in your leagues with the League Sync, integrated with Fanjections is the lineup generator, daily and weekly rankings, waiver wire, ownership percentages, projection stats, and tools. Build better lineups guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year. Promo code LOCK. Fantasy.com/lock, fantasy.com/lock, promo code LOCK. Josh Larky, you are a lock to give me some good analysis on Dave Canales going to Carolina from Tampa, a guy who was a coordinator for I believe 1 year in Tampa. Now he's the head man for Bryce Young and the Panthers. Man, do they need weapons there? And obviously Bryce Young, there's a non-zero chance that he is a bust. We'll see. But this can only mean better things, right? With Canales, an offensive mind, a bright young offensive mind going to Carolina. What are your thoughts on this hire as the Panthers now have their head man?
So I really like this one. The Carolina team is not going to be good next year. There's a multi-year rebuild. They wasted a lot of assets with the Bryce Young trade up. A lot of people lambast them for that. I think it was probably a bad trade. But if they had gotten Stroud, I don't think we'd probably be saying that. I think just ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're going to trade up, you should probably do it for quarterback. They got the wrong quarterback. That's okay. It's going to hamstring them this year as well because they don't have a first-round pick. But what I like about Canales is that if your team is multiple years away from contending, you might as well take a home run swing at head coach. Canales is pretty unknown, but I think he has the home run swing. The past 2 years are as good as you could get. 2022, he's the quarterback coach for the Seahawks. Mm-hmm. Geno Smith's 2022 was better than Russell Wilson's 2021. All right, that's great. But you might be like, well, Shane Waldron was there like this and that. Like, how do we know it was him? Well, then 2023, he's the offensive coordinator for Tampa Bay, and Baker Mayfield has a career year. We saw the career resurrection of Geno Smith, and then people said, please do it again in not just the quarterback coach capacity, but the OC capacity. So then he did it with Baker Mayfield. This is why I like it. It feels like the home run swing of like, we don't know that much about him. We don't have this massive track record, but we have a really hot 2-year stretch. And let's just say that it's a terrible hire. Whatever. You weren't going to be good next year. You probably weren't going to be good the year after. If it's a great hire, and you accelerate Bryce Young and his development, and you're able to call an offense that fits his strengths, then that's really good. So I think this is exactly the type of head coach hire that you want to see if you're a Panthers fan. And they don't have a lot to be optimistic about as a fan base right now. I think this is one, Dave Canales, that you could be optimistic about.
I think you should, right? At this point, like you have to with Carolina. There's only one way to go, and that's up, clearly. The last thing I want to get to before we get into this draft here, Biplab Mandel wanted to know what your thoughts, Josh, are on the effect that Isiah Likely is going to have on Mark Andrews going forward. In the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament ADP, Likely is tight end 19. He's going off at the end of the 11th round. Mark Andrews, on the other hand, you're looking at him as tight end 4 at the beginning of the 4th round. Does one of those seem too high or too low? Your thoughts on Andrews versus Likely going forward?
Say where Likely was going. So Andrews round 4. Which round is Likely again?
You're looking at the end of the 11th round for Likely. Tight end premium scoring, obviously.
So I've never been a big Mark Andrews guy in fantasy football. I think he's really good. I liked him early in his career, and then I thought he got a little bit overrated for fantasy. It's not even necessarily that Mark Andrews is a bad player. It's that he plays with Lamar Jackson. And I think this is a good stat to illustrate it. Mark Andrews seasons above 875 receiving yards. 1. It was when all 3 Baltimore running backs got hurt in the preseason, and their whole defensive secondary got hurt, and Tyler Huntley force-fed him double-digit targets per game for a full month when Lamar went down. That is when Andrews had his massive season when he was the fantasy tight end 1. 1 season above 875 receiving yards. He's been in the league for a long time. Seasons below 600 receiving yards, he's done that twice. Ultimately, Mark Andrews is not really a volume guy. People think he can be a volume guy because they remember the one season where, again, all 3 Baltimore running backs got hurt in the preseason. The whole defensive secondary got hurt. And Tyler Huntley was playing for a month at the end of the year, force-feeding him targets when the secondary was so injured and banged up, and they couldn't stop anybody. 4th round just feels a little rich still. I generally like drafting early tight ends when I think they have this game-breaking upside. I don't really see that with Mark Andrews this next year. He's better than Isiah Likely. Isiah Likely is also fine. Mark Andrews gets hurt a lot. Isiah Likely is pretty competent. As a rookie, Likely cut into his role. This past year, Likely actually didn't really play when Andrews was healthy. I don't really know what the dynamic's going to be. If I had to choose one, let's just take the guy that goes later, much later, where that pick doesn't burn you with Isiah Likely. I don't know where I'm going to rank Mark Andrews, but that just feels a little bit early for a guy that I think is going to be good but not great. At a position that is just hit with injuries year after year. I don't want to take the swing unless it feels like a home run swing. And I just don't think Mark Andrews feels like that.
Yeah. And he may not be. And I get the thing is, and this is how fantasy players' minds work. If he comes back and plays a lot this weekend, and maybe the Ravens move on to the Super Bowl and he has a big Super Bowl, people will tend to forget what happened at the end of this past year, and maybe they'll inflate his stock too much based on, what he's going to do going forward. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of, you mentioned Lamar Jackson. There's still the Isiah Likely factor. Like there's a lot of other things. A more nuanced approach to Mark Andrews might be the smart play in fantasy football drafts in 2024, like the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, which is going on right now. I think we have close to a dozen leagues already finished drafting. I want to take a look at the first draft that completed drafting probably last week sometime. This is a 20-round draft, no kickers, no defenses. It's best ball. And the the draft will shut off prior to the NFL draft. So everybody's basically on the same level playing field. I have the draft in front of me, thanks to Overhyped Sleeper. Dan Williamson from Player Profiler posted this on his Twitter feed. Follow him at x.com/overhypedsleeper. We'll piecemeal this. We'll try to tackle as many things as we can. We teased the Rams in the first segment on the show tonight, Josh. In this draft, Puka Nacua 111, Kyron Williams 112. Mind blown, number one, because if you would have looked at this point last year, people would have said you were crazy. But then we saw what they did in 2023, both these players, and now they're both first-round picks in this draft. Nacua and Kyron Williams, smart plays there, or would you be fading them in the first round?
I think they're late round 1, early round 2 picks. That sounds fine to me. When Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp overlapped for 13 games this past year, Puka Nacua had nearly 30 more receiving yards per game, 87 compared to Kupp's 59. He just set the rookie receiving yards record. We hope Stafford returns. If so, I don't know why Puka wouldn't do well. Kyren Williams, I think, is a little less safe just given that he plays running back and he doesn't really have draft capital. Puka doesn't have draft capital, but at receiver, you can't really fake it. Running back, it's just such a volume game. And sure enough, he had a ton of volume. 19 carries, 4 targets a game, 113 total yards per game, second in fantasy points per game behind only McCaffrey. So all that's really great. I'm not as concerned about the draft. I think free agency would offer a little bit of concern. Next Gen Stats had Kyren Williams as an awesome running back in terms of rushing yards over expected per attempt. So that makes me think he's probably there. If you're awesome per attempt and get a lot of attempts, that's, again, really hard to fake, just like being a good receiver like Puka. So as of right now, I think Puka and Kyren, I think they're back into the first round type candidates to consider.
So I get, we've talked about this all night with other, players entering the backfield of the Bengals and obviously I think the Rams would apply here too. Let me just tell you a quick Kyren Williams story. So the only reason I was on this dude in drafts last year, Josh, was because I saw a tweet from Jordan Rodriguez, who I believe is with ESPN, covers the Rams for ESPN. And she said that she's seen Kyren Williams catch all these passes in preseason, in two-a-days and everything going on there in training camp. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll take a chance on him 14th, 15th round. And if Cam Akers gets hurt, we'll see. So I had a lot of Kyren Williams shares, but I never believed in this guy because he had a bad combine. He's not that fast. Like, he doesn't do anything athletically all that well, but he's just a really good football player. And at that point, and I know the Rams have other issues to address, at that point, I'm like, well, this has been great for 2023. For 2024, I know what he did in it last season, but I still feel a little bit skittish about taking this guy as high as he's going right now, given that the Rams have the draft and free agency to address this concern.
Yeah, I still just wouldn't be too worried because the draft, not a lot of high-end talents. And I think what's more important than the draft capital at this point is that the guy literally had the second best role in the NFL at running back behind McCaffrey and scored the second most fantasy points behind only McCaffrey. And when you look at some of the advanced analytics from player tracking stuff like Amazon's Next Gen Stats, he was awesome. So that's why, for me at least, I think this pick can definitely backfire. I will not deny that. They could do something. Kyren Williams showed that he struggled to stay healthy with this workload. But if we knew we were just getting this version of Kyren, he'd be like the 104, 105.
Right, he would, yes,
draft.
exactly.
So
right,
there is still, it's not like, like him going at the 1-2 turn is like the highest it could go. He could go up. It wouldn't shock me if he's the 104, 105, 106 come August if they're not really doing anything. That's why I think that's why I'm okay with it, I guess, is that I know there's room for it to grow and that I don't actually think his ceiling is a late first round pick. So if we should like that he's playing with Stafford, and we should also like that there's so many unproven players still and so many holes on defense and offensive line. So I think there's just so many places they could look in free agency at the draft to fix that are not running back.
The biggest thing to understand, I think you just centered on this, he is still an ascending asset, or has the potential to be an ascending asset at the end of the first round. Miami Dolphins running backs, this is big too. Devon Achane in this draft went at the 207. Raheem Mostert did not go until the 8-11. So Mostert at the end of the 8th round, Devon Achane in the middle of the 2nd. We know the season Mostert put up. We also know his age and injury history. We know that Achane is an ascending talent in the NFL. Are you good with the distance between Achane and Mostert in this draft? You're talking about 6.5 rounds here, or 5.5, as it were. I think 5.5. Go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds fine to me. I have Devon Achane as my 17th ranked player. Have not ranked Mostert yet. Mostert, though, will be 32 years old for the entire 2024 season. Coming off the biggest workload of his career, the only year pretty much that he didn't get hurt. For the most part, he missed, was it 1, maybe 2 games towards the end of the year, but for the most part, relatively healthy. Fat workload at age 31. Age 32, I'm very concerned. That is not the kind of running back I will ever target in fantasy drafts. I won't blame anyone who takes him in the 8th round. That sounds fine. But Achane, I love 9 games where he played at least 25 snaps as a rookie. In those games, he averaged 11 carries, 3.9 targets. That's 15 opportunities a game. I'm not going to get into his actual yardage because it was unsustainable efficiency. But I think the fact that he was willing to, the team was giving him 15 opportunities a game on average, shows that they thought he could at times handle a reasonable workload. And it just so happens in those 9 games, because he was insanely efficient, because he's really fast, because he scores touchdowns on a good offense, he had 21 fantasy points a game. Only Kyron Williams and Christian McCaffrey averaged more than he did in the 9 games where he had at least 25 snaps, which is still not even a very high number.
Mm-hmm. I think that here's the thing. I think you're a little bit higher on Mostert than I am, but honestly, when it comes to the end of the 8th round, and I like the team that took him at the 8-11 had one running back on their team. If I have one running back and I'm in the 8th round and Mostert's still sitting out there, I'd be hard pressed to say, no, this is a bad decision. I'm going to look elsewhere. I'll probably take him there, but I don't have a whole lot of faith in him. To your point, the 2 games at the end of the year that he missed, that might have been Miami just resting him too. Like it might have been the thing where like, yeah, he's a little bit dinged up. He could play if he has to. Yeah. He didn't have to play it. Like, and I don't know what goes into that. Like only Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins coaching staff knows. Another playoff team. Let's talk about them for a second, because I've been wanting to bring up CJ Stroud all night. Haven't been able to. I'll do it now. Let's talk about his top 2 receivers. Tank Dell in this draft goes at the 401, first pick of the 4th round to team 12. And then Nico Collins actually went earlier. He went at the 304 in this draft. So you're looking at about 8 picks separating the 2. Collins went in the early 3rd round, Dell in the early 4th round. Do you have a feeling on either of the of these receivers going forward? Did one of them or both of them go too early, too late? How do you feel about Tank Dell and Nico Collins at these price tags, Josh?
I have them ranked a little bit higher. I have them all 7 spots apart. So it looks like you said what they were like 8 spots apart. So it looks like we're pretty aligned in terms of how they're very similar. I have Nico player 18 right now. I have Dell player 25. That is not with tight end premium. If it was tight end premium, I'd have 2 tight ends ahead of them. So they'd be at 20 and 27. Pretty similar. I want to be high on these Houston receivers. Nico Collins, 17.5 fantasy points per game, was 7th in the NFL among receivers, 7th in PPR fantasy points per game, and 2 of those games he left early. His 3.3 yards per out run was topped by Tyreek Hill. That is it.
Wow.
And then Dell himself was a low-end fantasy wide receiver 1 prior to the broken leg, 16 fantasy points a game. We love that. That's as a rookie. That's awesome. If Puka Nacua wasn't Puka Nacua, we would be freaking out about Tank Dell. And the concern is that he broke his leg. It hurt Tony Pollard earlier this year. I think in general, broken leg, bad. We also should worry about his size and the injuries associated with it. He's 165 pounds. That's similar to Marquise Brown. We've seen a Marquise Brown struggles to stay healthy. But I especially in best ball, like he's going to miss a few games. That's fine. I want him anytime that he's healthy. I know he's going to be producing. He's got speed. He's a downfield threat for this elite young quarterback in CJ Stroud. We have no idea what this offense will look like next year, but it should be similarly good, maybe better. Quarterbacks that look like Stroud in year 1 generally don't do anything other than be awesome. Receivers that look like Tank Dell as a rookie generally don't do anything other than be awesome. I think this could be like a Chase Higgins idea just in terms of, or like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. When you have 2 young receivers and a good quarterback, a good offensive ecosystem, they are legally allowed to both finish as wide receiver 1s in fantasy. We actually saw that in fantasy points per game this year until Dell got hurt. So I'm perfectly fine having them both off the board in the first 25 to 30 picks.
Harry Snowman posting on YouTube. He loves Nico Collins, but he's buying the discount on Tank Dell, which Josh Larky just told you is fine. The question from Dom Gazzetti here. Nico Collins or Chris Olave? Now, in this draft, Collins went at the 304. Chris Olave was off the board at the 301. So Olave went just ahead of Collins. I'm looking at the ADP on this on Fantasy Mojo. Olave, 211 is his ADP. Nico Collins, 212. So Collins actually fell a little bit in this draft. If you could only pick one of these guys, Josh, would it be Nico Collins or would it be Chris Olave for 2024?
I'll take Collins. I have Collins 1 pick ahead of Olave, but I have Olave in a next tier. And the reason you might say like, you have him in a different tier. Why would that be? It's simple. It's quarterback play. These are both guys that are pretty fast and that are running pretty far downfield. One of them plays with CJ Stroud. The other plays with Derek Carr. It's as simple as that. I will always defer to the guy that's playing with the much, much, much better quarterback. So why not just go with Nico Collins here when I know that the quarterback play is going to be better?
Yeah, and only going to get better too, right? Like it's all about ascending, and CJ Stroud should ascend as well Nico Collins, CJ Stroud, Tank Dell. All the rising tide of the Houston Texans will go up with Stroud. Rashee Rice, we haven't talked about him. We talked very little about Rashee Rice tonight. He went at the 310 in this draft, Josh, as the 18th receiver off the board. Travis Kelce, to me, I know what he did in the divisional playoff. To me, the over the course of the season, I feel like he is not the same player he used to be. And why wouldn't he be? He's like 63 years old at this point. I get it. He's going to start slowing down at some point. I know the Chiefs need to do some work on their wide receivers, but as good as Rashee Rice is like a borderline top 12 guy starting throughout the month of December. And even if they add somebody, like Rice is still going to be a force in this offense. Is he a force enough for you to take him at the end of the third round?
So the show's coming to an end. Let's get spicy. I was shocked at Rashee Rice going at pick 34. What the heck are we doing, people? I have him at player 16. I have him way, way, way higher. Rashee Rice was a full-time player in this offense week 12 onward. We include the playoffs that have happened so far. That's 8 games, 9 targets a game, 7 receptions a game, 87 yards a game, 18.5 fantasy points per game, which is a mid to high-end fantasy wide receiver 1. He is the top option for Patrick Mahomes. He had 2.5 yards per route run. That was well ahead of Kelsey's 2.1, which was second on the team. Travis Kelce had a great resurgence. Clap, clap, clap. These 2 playoff games so far. Congrats, Travis Kelce. You shredded a Dolphins team down half their starters. And then a Bills team that was also down nearly half their starters on defense as well. I think Kelce enthusiasts are going to be in for a rude awakening when a full strength and awesome Ravens defense shows up. And Kelce is just a shell of himself at this point. He'll be 35 for most of next season. I think Rashee Rice is just a smash. You want Mahomes' top option. We've seen it be Kelce. Rashee Rice is, he's receiver. He's not tight end. So like the eligibility is different, but Rashee Rice is much, much faster. His skill set is really good. A guy that can win downfield, but that also can get yards after the catch on short passes. I don't really know like what more you needed to see from him in the second half of last year. I really think the only reason Rashee Rice is not higher in people's minds is Sky Moore. I got burned. Many of us got burned from Sky Moore. Yeah. Sky Moore burned me so much in 2022, and then he once again burned me so much in 2023. I've been wrong twice, but you know what I wasn't wrong on? I loved Rashee Rice this past year. I'm going to love him again this year. I don't expect to be wrong. I expect to be right on Rashee Rice twice. We should like players that play with Patrick Mahomes, and I think he's the number 1 option. Player 16 for me currently, and I think that's actually very reasonable for everything I listed.
Josh, there are so many. You are so active on social media. You're so active with getting your content out, and people love it. Give us the plug, man. Give us the reminder. I know it's J Larky Tweets on X. Give us everything else, all the other ways that we can connect with you and consume more of your content.
Yeah, you can see my content, my team's content, the33rdteam.com. Check that out. Our free Discord is linked in every one of those articles as well. That's just the best place to go. If you want my big article, I wrote up my top 36 players for 2024 redraft. I ranked them, and I wrote a full paragraph for every single player to help you understand some of the stats I'm looking at, how I'm roughly viewing these players to kind of get inside my head, because rankings are cool, but just seeing how someone's viewing a player in their situation is often more important. And that's where you can see why I have players like Rashee Rice at number 16, why I'm so high on Nico Collins, on Tank Dell, why I love Devon Achane, why I'm okay with Rams going early. And you'll see that I have some veterans like Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen ranked relatively favorably. Someone like Stefon Diggs, who stunk at the end of the year, not so much. We should, I think I'll put it this way. This is a good one, actually. So Stefon Diggs went at 2-4 in that way too early draft that we talked about. Pick 204. DeAndre Hopkins went 1003. What the heck are we doing, folks? DeAndre Hopkins was 4th in the NFL this past year in team air yard share. He was 10th in target share. what is going on there? I get the quarterback play, but like when you talk about aging receivers, one of them looked like he was aging a whole lot faster than the other. So I think those are the types of things that we have to be really, really aware of. And I think my rankings will help some people there.
The33rdteam.com at JLarky tweets. Check those out for more information. That's where you can learn more. Josh, thank you so much. I appreciate you hopping aboard tonight. So much fun. Next week, 7 o'clock Eastern time, it will be Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros hopping aboard for 2 full hours. MyFFPC.com, MyFFPC.com. Get involved in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, as well as picking up Dynasty Orphan teams at massive discounts. MyFFPC.com is where to go for that. The Best of the Better Sports Network is up next. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next week.